Hi there, everyone. My name is Hideo Resi. I'm CEO of the Dessel Group, which is the parent company of VC Lab. I'm also the executive director of the Founder Institute, which is one of the largest accelerators in the world on a number of different metrics. So let me talk briefly about my background because it's particularly relevant to the subject matter today, which is how to launch a top accelerator and some tips to do so. So I've done it. I've launched in many ways the largest accelerator in the world today. There's a number of different ways you can measure accelerators, number of alumni, value created, reach, etc. And on pretty much most of the metrics, we're number one. The area where we're not number one, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is the size of the portfolio, usually measured in what are called assets under management, or AUM. So there, Y Combinator's number one. They've created like Airbnb and some really big seminal companies of today. And so, Airbnb alone is an enormous business. And so it's we at Founder Institute have created lots of very large businesses, Udemy, et cetera. But when you look at the portfolio of Y Combinator, it's by far number one. Ironically, we're number two, and I believe Techstars is number three. But there's a lot of areas where Founder Institute's number one. So we are in the most cities and countries around the world by far. If you add up all the cities where we have operated, it's in 300 or so. All the cities where we are operating right now is 200 or so. And look, we were pretty big in Russia. We pulled out, obviously, when all the craziness happened in Ukraine. So we were pretty big in China, and we pulled out when all of the craziness happened between the US and China. So, we've been in some places that we've retreated out of. And that's part of one of the reasons why we've historically operated in over 300 cities and currently operate in 200 something cities, but no one's even remotely close to that number, right? We have the largest number of alumni. We have nearing 10,000 companies that have come through the Founder Institute program, and various levels of success. We have definitely multi-billion-dollar outcomes, right? And then we have smaller outcomes. When you leave some of the major venture markets in the world, some of the outcomes aren't as large. And one of the reasons for that, which is why we started VC Lab, is that in many cities around the world, there's no venture ecosystem. So there's essentially a glass ceiling of how big a local company can get, because in order to get bigger, they have to leave their home city and home country and go to a thriving venture ecosystem. And we said, this is ridiculous. So we started VC Lab to solve that problem, to create more thriving venture ecosystems all around the world. But to start those venture ecosystems, right, there's no better thing that you can do than run an accelerator or a funding accelerator. And I'll be talking in pretty good detail about that. But there's a couple other areas that Founder Institute's number one in the world. So I'll just finish those first and then jump into the how-to portion. So we run the largest number of events. In fact, we're the largest event organizer in the world on a number of metrics. So there's some event organizers that have more people. So CES is a huge event. Hundreds of thousands of people go to CES. So we're only about 100,000 people a year come to Founder Institute events, but we run thousands of events. We run many events every day all around the world. And so Founder Institute is the largest event organizer in the world in terms of number of events, geographic distribution of events, and a variety of other metrics. So it's a pretty large organization. It does a lot of good work in the world, and it runs really smoothly, ish. I could tell you all sorts of things about running an accelerator that I've learned, because here's the other thing. Founder Institute runs hundreds of programs a year, hundreds, not quite thousands, but hundreds. Okay. And most accelerators will run 1, 2, maybe up to 4 programs a year. Okay. So VC Lab is just moving. We're going to 4 or 5 programs a year. So we're like a traditional normal accelerator in that we run a few programs a year. Founder Institute runs a few hundred programs a year. Okay. So our learnings there are very fast, because we can test something almost instantly. If you have an idea, oh, we should try this in the next accelerator back. Oh, that's starting in an hour. Let's get going. We can make it happen. So our ability to learn there was very high. And I'm going to share some of those insights with you now. So let's get started. We have good turnout. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see it. 5 steps to launch a top accelerator. I really wanted to, one of the things I want to stress is we're talking about a top accelerator, okay? I don't, like, you want to launch something like a part-time nights and weekends kind of crappy thing, not interested. If you want to launch a top accelerator, I'm going to give you some insights on how to do that. And as I was saying in the opening, the most important thing right now that everyone here needs to understand is that every single city everywhere in the world should have multiple successful funding accelerators in order to prop up that ecosystem. And we know this because we launched accelerators everywhere. In many countries, many cities around the world, the Founder Institute launched the first accelerators in those areas. And the net effect to the startup ecosystem of that activity was enormous. Under Obama, where they had an initiative at the State Department to bring entrepreneurship all around the world, we were the love child. They loved us. The State Department's like, oh, you're opening accelerators everywhere in the world. The impact of this is intense and enormous, and it's changing things. And let me tell you, it totally changed things. I went to Bogota, Colombia. We launched the first real accelerator in the country of Colombia, in the city of Bogota. And then we expanded, by the way, throughout the country. And I flew down, and the first time successful CEOs of tech companies met in person was a mentor luncheon that I hosted. They all knew each other because but back then, it was a long time ago, maybe 2011, something like that. A lot of the tech CEOs didn't want too much publicity, so they didn't really have LinkedIn profiles. They kind of kept secret, but they all knew who each other was, and they met for the first time in person at that mentor lunch. And now Colombia is a top thriving venture ecosystem in all of LATAM. And, similar stuff in Chile, though. In Chile, there was a program, Startup Chile, which was around the same time. And between Startup Chile and the Founder Institute coming in, huge. In Africa, I can tell you stories all day long. But the main point is that funding accelerators and accelerators in a market rises the startup ecosystem and creates the conditions for success. Large companies get disrupted, new platforms emerge, entrepreneurs start achieving success, and you start a flywheel of really a startup movement within your city and country. And really, it's not just one accelerator. You need multiple accelerators. Now, way back, one is better than 0, but the idea is that you're going to have multiple accelerators, and those accelerators should collaborate. So if you're thinking to start an accelerator, I'm going to give you some tips on how to do it, some advice, and some real, hopefully deep insight. So the first thing that you want to do when you're thinking of launching an accelerator, and you may even be well underway to launching it. If you are well underway to launching it, I recommend you go back and you actually make sure that all of these things are done, and then kind of go back to where you are, because these are also in order. All right. So most accelerators that you're serious about, so that you can do accelerators part-time, right? And you can do accelerators more full-time or full-time. And if you're looking to be more serious about running an accelerator, then you're definitely going to need an attached fund. And I'm going to show you how to do all that. But the first thing you need to get the accelerator off the ground, to get the fund off the ground, to get any of that stuff off the ground is some sort of thesis, right? About what you're going to do and provide. Right. And usually I'm going to give you the template and an example and all this type of stuff. But the thesis begins with you, right? You find something that you're good at, and then you find a hole in the market and you match those two. And then you start testing this with your friends, your confidants, angels, people in the market. And when they're like, yeah, that's really awesome, I think that makes total sense, we really need that here, then you know you're onto something. And we have a thesis template for you. So fund name is launching an X million dollar accelerator fund in Country City to back geography sector ideas with secret sauce. So, here's an example. AAI is launching a $4 million accelerator fund in Seattle to back Pacific Northwest AI startups based on the GP's history of leading 200 million in AI projects at Microsoft. Okay. Maybe not the best thesis, but certainly a 4 out of 5. While we're here, Niels, can you provide a link to the thesis, the pre-curriculum with the thesis? And can you also provide a link to our AI tools to help write a thesis? So not only do we have a set of exercises that you can go through to build your own thesis. And if that were not enough, we also have an AI set of tools to help you write your thesis. So this should not be that hard for you. Okay? Now, once you have a thesis, and once you've sort of tested that thesis with, and again, the thesis here is I'm focusing on funding because I'm just assuming that most people here are serious and they're going to do a accelerator with an attached fund to fund the alumni, whether it gives them $25,000, which is really now table stakes for a funding accelerator, or $100,000, which is on the higher end of funding accelerators. Whatever the number is, I'm assuming you're going to have an attached fund. But you can launch accelerators without an attached fund. Then you would have a thesis that doesn't have any funding in it. But again, since most of you will be doing one with an attached fund, put the funding numbers in there, test it with your confidants. And once your confidants are sounding excited about what you're doing, once people in the market are a little bit excited about just that thesis statement, nothing else, then you want to go and start hosting some events, right? So, and this is important because your confidants, angels, all this type of stuff could be like, hey, this is really great. I think it's a great idea. Everyone's going to love it. But if you go out there and you try and get people to come to an event or try and engage them and no one comes and no one engages, then maybe you don't have a good idea. So you're going from a thesis with what I would consider internal validation to when you're starting to host events, you're beginning to do external validation, right? So again, if you're doing an AI accelerator based on your experiences at Microsoft, which was the hypothetical example, maybe you could do, hey, some tips from Microsoft for AI founders. That could be an event, right? Tips from Microsoft for AI founders, right? Just host the event, see who comes, right? Do some promotion on local event channels. Up in Seattle, there's GeekWire. There's a bunch of different things. So now you're seeing, okay, I've got, 30 or 40 founders that came to an event based on my thesis. That's a pretty good sign. Maybe you get a speaker or two. And if you're starting to get this demand and you're feeling like things are really working, that's evidence that your thesis works now externally as well as internally. And you want to not host one event, not two events. You probably want to have three, maybe four events. And here's the thing. There's a lot of decisions that you need to make when you're launching an accelerator, right? Is it going to be curriculum based? How is mentorship going to work, right? Do people get in, get money, and stay the entire time? So like you try and help them no matter what, or do you cut people that are not performing, right? When do you write the investment check? Do you write it at the beginning? Do you try and get some history with the companies and write it at the end? How do you want to help? Do you want to provide like more services like marketing or whatever? Or do you want to be really more of guidance and advisory? Or is it a network of mentors? Or is it peer help? So there are lots of questions that need to be answered in how you run an accelerator. And you can use the events to test them, right? So you say, I really think that having a group of mentors really doing a deep dive on companies will help them. Okay, that's an idea. All right, we'll do an event. Sit down with 5 mentors for your AI startup idea. Get 5 mentors, get a bunch of founders there, and then put them in front and see if it works, right? Oh, that didn't work as well as I thought. Maybe I should do something differently. So you can use the 3 to 5 events that you throw to test first market demand and also your operating ideas for the accelerator itself, right? So you can say, okay, I tested this 5 mentor thing. It didn't really work. I'm going to test this other thing now, see if that works. And so you should use the events also to help build the program. But now you have validation from your friends, validation from the market. Step 3 is you need to go start raising capital. Now, raising capital is harder than most people think. The good news is accelerator funds tend to be smaller, right? Because they fund the operations of the accelerator. They give money to people who participate in the accelerator. And generally, you're looking to fund about 2 years of your operations with one fund. So that might be 2 cohorts or 3 cohorts or 4 cohorts, depending. So 2 to 4 cohorts. So you usually see accelerator funds like $2 million, $4 million, something like that, right? And so they're not very large. So that's great, right? So they're much easier to raise than they're smaller. But do not think that raising money is easy. Raising money is hard. Raising fund money is the hardest type of fundraising there is. The good news is your fund is smaller. it doesn't matter very much because fundraising is just super hard no matter what you do. So what you want to do is leverage the network that you've built up by doing the events, leverage the mentors, leverage the angels that you've, and really try and get them to buy into your fund. And it's going to take you a few months. It's going to take you 4 months in the Founder Institute, excuse me, the VC Lab program right now is averaging about 4 months from the start of the program to the first close. That's very fast. Most managers need more time. They need 6, 9, 12 months to get to a first close, even 18 months. So if you're fortunate and you get into a program like VC Lab, and we do have an accelerator track, we should be able to get you to a close in about 4 or 5 months, which is pretty fast, but it's going to take some time. And you want to close about $1 million at a minimum or half of your target fund size because you want to have enough money to make the investments, to get your operations off the ground of at least one cohort, because it's hard to raise and run at the same time. Now, you're always, when you have a fund attached to anything, accelerator or whatever, you're always fundraising until your fund is fully closed. So you, even if you're running the accelerator and you've only raised about half of the fund size, you're going to need to continue raising until you get the full amount. So you'll be running the accelerator and fundraising. This is going to be very standard for you. You're going to basically be running the accelerator and fundraising all of the time. All right. Because eventually you'll go on to fund 2, fund 3, fund 4. So it's going to be a little bit of shucking and jiving where you're like, okay, I'm running the accelerator and fundraising, and sometimes you're going to be running the accelerator more, and other times you're going to be fundraising more, but you're going to be doing them pretty much all the time, just as an FYI. Now, raising capital, right, is as I said, an ongoing process. But once you get to that roughly $1 million or 50% of your target fund size, you're going to really, at that point, want to start forming, but not beforehand. So you need to prove first. So this is a huge mistake that's done everywhere in the world. People form all their stuff first, right? And then they go fundraise second. And then a lot of times they realize, oh crap, I didn't get it right, and my thesis isn't right, my accelerator idea isn't right, and they've spent 50, 100,000, $150,000 on legal and formation and other stuff, and they have to throw it all away. Okay, this happens all the time. So you get demand first. You get $1 million in commitments first. You get 50% of your fund size interested first, and then you form. Okay? Only after you have demand do you form the entities. And then you really need to use people who know what they're doing. And I'm going to show a diagram. It's pretty complicated, and I'm going to explain it to you. But again, only start the formation after you have the demand, and you must use knowledgeable experts because it's complicated, guys. It's just complicated, right? So an accelerator fund will generally have, or let me rephrase, a funding accelerator or accelerator fund diagram will have 4 entities, okay? 4, all right? You're going to have a manco, right, which is the parent company. It owns the brand. It's where the intellectual property sits, etc. Okay, it's called the management company or manco, and that's at the very, very top. Then when you move down, you're going to branch into two things. You're going to have the accelerator itself and the fund. Okay. So on the accelerator side, which is to the right here, you're going to have an entity that does all the accelerator operations, etc. It may, if the accelerator gets some equity somehow, it may take the equity. Uh, it's usually owned by the Manco. But let me give you an example of why this entity exists, because people are like, why is there this entity when you have the Manco? Can I do it in the Manco? Let's say you have an event and someone trips and they sue you, right? All that lawsuit stuff will happen in this accelerator, this pink accelerator bucket over here to the right. And the Manco won't get affected. The fund won't get affected. Nothing else gets affected because someone tripped and hurt themselves at the accelerator level. And there are lots of things that can happen at the accelerator level. I mean, it's someone we've had a building collapse. I mean, we're having run thousands of accelerator programs all around the world. All sorts of weird stuff happens, right? And so you just don't want the liability or anything like that from the accelerator to affect the Manco and to affect the fund. So you have the accelerator over to the side. And then on the other side, you have the fund. And funds traditionally have a Manco, a GP, and a fund. So you have here the Manco, the general partner, and the fund. And then there's a lot of stuff that you need to think about. I mean, I want to be sensitive of time, and I want to answer your specific questions. So if you do have questions, pop them into the chat. But if you'll see here, note in red, and I'll read it to you, it might be too small. There are fiduciary duty issues and conflicts of interest when investing in both the accelerator and startups. Independent decision makers are needed on the investment committee. Okay, right? So if you're a fund, and even if it's a fund that's, part of the accelerator, etc., there's, fiduciary duties of the fund managers, and that are, just by law and by profession, by trade, and they have to be sensitive. So you it's not just like, yeah, we're gonna, maybe you have a policy that you invest $25,000 in every company. Okay, fine. So every company gets $25,000. That's policy. So you don't need an IC or anything like that, because it's like, here are the terms, here's the policy. But let's say you have a really hot company and they want slightly different terms. Well, that's all of a sudden, well, what do we do? Right? Or you want to do a follow-on investment in one of the companies, but not, what do you do then? What's the process? There's, again, a lot of issues, potential conflicts of interest, fiduciary duties. So these things need to be thought out, right? Now, you don't need to think them out right away. This is, again, step 4. It's not step 1. Step 1 is thesis. Step 2 is events, right? And then step 3 is get the fundraising demand. And then only in step 4 do you form the entities, and you need to worry about this. So I don't want to go too far into detail, because step 4 is step 4, and step 1, 2, and 3 need to be done well first. But part of the reason why I bring this all up is you need to work with someone who understands this stuff. Otherwise, you're going to get it wrong. And getting it wrong can mean failure of yourself to raise the fund, failure of yourself to close the fund, and failure of the fund to actually operate in a successful and effective way, right? So there's a lot of possible failures if you do this wrong, right? And so happy to get into specifics with you in the Q&A, but I'll get through the rest of the presentation. So, and then step 5 is launch, right? So you don't want to launch before you have the fund. I see a lot of people do that, because then your accelerator is less compelling, and it's really hard to raise a fund and run an accelerator at the same time from scratch. So what you want to do is get the first close done and then launch the accelerator, and then you're fundraising and running the accelerator at the same time, but you're fundraising for a second or third close rather than fundraising for a first close. And I can tell you, fundraising for a first close is really difficult. So you launch your inaugural program, you get some media, some events and deadlines to create something really compelling. Now, what I want to do is, so we're definitely here to help, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a minute, and I want to talk a little bit about some tips, and then we'll turn it over to questions. So probably I want to give you an important point and some tips. So let me start with the most important thing first. Accelerators are mission critical to the success of startup ecosystems around the world. I could regale you with tons of anecdotal, quantifiable data to make that point more emphatic, but just suffice it to say that more accelerators equals a better startup ecosystem. And then part of that, which is a first tip, is that a lot of times accelerators compete, right? So they're like, oh, there's another funding accelerator working on whatever in our market, sustainability, right? You should collaborate. In fact, I would argue that your zero-sum mindset is wrong. When the best thing that I've seen for startup ecosystems around the world is not only when there's a thriving accelerator market, but also when that accelerator market works together. And so we've launched accelerator networks in New York. We've launched accelerator networks like kind of all around the world where there's demand and desire to do so. And the markets where the accelerators work together and collaborate are thriving at a much different level than markets where they don't, right? Because coordinating is like, oh, I'm going to do my early admissions here. Why don't you do your early admissions and admissions here? You synchronize admissions dates, right? So you get more people interested. You do joint events, which gets more people interested. You collaborate with local media and government, which gets, more people interested. So, if you are in a market that has multiple accelerators and you're thinking to launch an accelerator, a great way to get started is to launch an accelerator network, right? In your local market to bring the people together. It will really boost things. Another obvious tip is do things in order, right? We have a very clear order that I outlined, thesis, test with your friends, events, fundraise, do things in order. Why? Because that order works. Of course, if you can succeed doing it out of order, but it's just making it more difficult for you. Why would you do that? Right? We know what the order to do things in. It makes sense. It works. So try your best to follow the order. If you're thinking of starting an accelerator, maybe another tip would be the Founder Institute is a great accelerator platform. They have two things. So you can run the Founder Institute Accelerator, which is really an idea or pre-seed accelerator. It does not give money away, so you don't need to do any of the funding stuff, and you can just launch it right now. If you're thinking to do more of a funding accelerator or more specialized, the Founder Institute platform, we use it at VC Lab. They're going to start, and in fact, in many ways, this is the announcement where they're going to allow accelerators to use their platform. And, VC Lab is a separate company. It's the top accelerator in the world for venture capital firms. and we run the entire thing on the Founder Institute back office, and they're opening that up. So there are other opportunities to work with the Founder Institute to use their program, either for a funding accelerator or without a funding accelerator, or use their technology. And their technology is unrivaled in this area because they run thousands a year. Why don't we go to questions, and I'll save some tips for a little bit later. It looks like we have 69 people and only 3 questions so far in the Q&A. So if you have a question, and I'm really happy to answer everyone's questions, please pop them into the Q&A and we'll go through them. You can also upvote questions that you have. So why don't we get started? John Roberts is asking, should the accelerator be industry agnostic? Are you saying that you can be specific around the thesis, i.e. climate tech, et cetera? I think that's a great question, John. And there's a couple ways to think about this. So accelerators in nascent markets, lots of places in Central Asia, lots of places in Africa, lots of places in the Middle East, in Latin America. Their startup ecosystems are still getting started. So they may have had a Founder Institute come in, they may have this or that, but they're nascent startup ecosystems. And in nascent startup ecosystems, generalist accelerators are great, right? We're just going to help you get off the ground and get started. And Founder Institute's a generalist accelerator. In developed startup ecosystems, New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, London, it's pretty clear what the developed startup ecosystems are. There are going to be a lot of different startup accelerators operating there. You might have a Founder Institute, you might have a Antler, you may have a Techstars, though Techstars is pulling back. And part of the reason why we think there's a great opportunity for accelerators right now is that Techstars is pulling back, Antler's pulling back, a number of big accelerators are pulling back, and we're like, oh, this is a great opportunity. And a lot of them are just pulling back because they're kind of messed up internally. It's not the markets are bad. They've made mistakes. So we're like, whoa, this is a huge market opportunity with some people retreating. So in developed markets where there's a number of different accelerators operating already, their focus is really important. So I would target an industry, target a stage, and really say, hey, we're going after this. But make sure that there's enough demand by running the events, et cetera, for that to work. Niels, do you want to grab the next question? I'll clear my throat.
Yes. Ashutosh is asking, in general, accelerators are considered to be expensive and it might not work in traditional 2% management fees model. How do you make accelerator economics work, and are there creative ways to structure a fund to overcome the barriers?
Yeah, and we didn't go into all the structural stuff. So basically, if you go back to the structural diagram, right, you essentially there are lots and lots and lots. This is a correct diagram, but there's many different ways to draw the arrows and have money flow, etc. So on a high level, the bank can be the fund, or you can have banking at the fund and at the accelerator level. But it's like, where does most of the commerce activity take place? Does it take place spread throughout, or is it concentrated? And usually if it's concentrated on the fund side. So over here. So your question presumes that the money is concentrated on the fund size because you were talking about management fees, et cetera. So what normally happens is you in money concentrated on the fund side. First and foremost, you have a management fee waterfall. Okay. And that will be, so you take higher fees in the beginning, some up to 4%. So instead of doing straight line 2% over the 10 or so years of the fund, you do 4% the first 2 years, and then you taper off because that's when you're running the accelerator program. So that alone will increase your management fees, right? That help you survive. Now, there's a couple other ways that accelerators make money. So that are all kind of above board. So one is they might give $100,000 to a company and charge the company $25,000 to be in the accelerator. And that effectively increases their management fees because they get some money back from the companies to cover the costs of the accelerators on top of whatever management fees they collect. So that's definitely one model. Another model is they have sponsors or backers, and that might come in the accelerator side, right? And so that grosses up the accelerator revenue. So usually an accelerator will need something beyond the straight management fees to cover the cost, but not always. Sometimes the management fees are sufficient. A final way that's done to gross up the management fees is that you can charge some of the accelerator expenses to the fund as fund expenses. And so it's the LPs pay in addition to the 2%. You may have some fund expenses from the accelerator to cover costs as well. So again, so there's a lot of 3 ways I just mentioned, a lot of other ways as well, but those are the 3 big ways. And that's why you need an experienced person to work with you on this. So you can work out the budget for the best way possible for your needs. That's fair and legal. And then also disclose to the limited partners. All right, let's do another question.
Yes. Interesting question from Adam Singer. What were the mistakes that Antler, Techstars, and others have made that led them to pull back?
Well, how much time do we have? Look, everyone like Founder Institute, we all make mistakes. There's no one's perfect, right? So I don't want to make it seem like anyone's I think in the case of Antler, they overexpanded, right? Into a lot of markets and then realized, wait a minute. And the problem with expansion, and as someone who's expanded a lot, is you don't know until you've expanded whether it's good or not. And then once you've done it, it's like, oh crap, it wasn't maybe the best idea to do it this way. We got to change, right? So we got very lucky at the Founder Institute as our expansion model pretty much worked. And I would say with Antler, their expansion model was a little janky and they're refining it. And so that's part of the reason they're pulling back. Techstars is just a different story. It boils a lot down to a similar dynamic in that they went after these corporates and they were getting lots and lots of money from corporations to run accelerator programs. And basically those accelerator programs kind of weren't very successful, right? Some were for sure, right? There were definitely bright stars within that approach, but a lot were not, right? So the companies weren't super happy with the results. The founders in the programs weren't super happy with the results, and the resulting startups that came out of it weren't that exceptional. But it was making them a lot of money because they were pretty much not giving the companies any equity and charging lots of money. So you can imagine that like a company pays a few $1 million a year. They're not getting equity. It's innovation theater. The companies weren't super high. Founders weren't super high. Resulting startups weren't super high. Lots of money is being sent. Techstars making money. But eventually that ended, right? Companies are like, this isn't really working out. Techstars is like, this isn't really working out. And then unfortunately, maybe that transition wasn't handled super well. There's a lot of great articles. I don't know. Did you see one of those articles that was being passed around, Niels? Maybe you could put it in the chat. But that did not work out very well. And so when they tried to retreat from that model, it didn't. A lot of people in the network got frustrated and left, and they're kind of in the middle of that right now. It happens, right? It's nothing against Techstars, nothing against Antler. It just happens, right? You get big really fast. Listen, I can tell you about our own mistakes as well. We but thankfully what we did is we never got too far ahead of our skis at the Founder Institute because we're not a funded entity. We're a break-even entity that does this to help humanity. And so we never had external capital to go out and really push too far ahead of our skis. And I think what's happened, what you've seen with some funding accelerators got really big, they raised money, they got bigger, and they got a little bit too far ahead of their skis and then realized, oop, we went the wrong direction, and they had to retreat and fix. We just didn't have that happen because we didn't have external funding.
Melissa's asking if you already have a fund, can you still start an accelerator?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. And I know you're thinking about this as well, Melissa. Right. So I would do everything that I just outlined, come up with a thesis, start doing the events, use the events to come up with, refine your ideas on approach and curriculum and structure and all that stuff. Um, and then once you have all that figured out and you already have a fund, then it's like you probably need to notify your limited partners of your plan, right? Hey, I'm going to be doing an accelerator because it might be different from your original thesis, and assume that you need to give them the approval rights because it's a material change. And if they but ideally you're going to come to them with a well-baked plan because you've tested the thesis, tested the market demand with events, and then you come to them with a plan. So it should be a bit of a faster process, but absolutely you can do it if you have a fund already. I mean, people with funds do it all the time. Sequoia launched an accelerator, right? So it's not not uncommon that venture funds with operating funds launch accelerators like Sequoia.
Could you share more best practices to deal with the conflict of interest between the accelerator and the fund?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go through all the conflicts of interest, but they're just obvious ones, right? Like if you've going to do separate terms for a particular company, or you're going to do a follow-on, blah, blah, blah. So there are lots of areas. So the best practice is pretty simple. You either have separate people working on the fund or the accelerator, which isn't really plausible for most people starting out, right? Because the team is too small. So you're going to have the same people on the accelerator as you have on the fund. So, but if you can have separate people, that definitely will solve a lot of the problems right there. The second thing to do is to set up a small, if you can have separate people, to set up a small investment committee that have independent people. And so for anything that isn't like a standard, rubber stamp deal, and it might be that your accelerator doesn't do any standard rubber stamp deals. So the investment committee would be needed for everything, right? It depends on what your model is, but you'll have an independent investment committee that will look at the deals and approve them. And it doesn't have to be that complicated. Usually accelerator deals are pretty small. So, maybe an investment committee would need to do something like a few hours a month, like 3 hours a month. So it's not a big lift. But having that independence is the easiest way. And I think we even show in the diagram, which is also available online. And maybe you could put a link to the post where we put the deck, Niels. but it says there's an LPAC, which is a limited partner advisory committee, and an investment committee in the diagram. And I'll just share the screen again quickly. So if you see down at the sort of center left, there's an LPAC, an investment committee, right? That's why they're there in this diagram too. They're not needed if you have separate teams, but as I said, most of you will not. Let's go to the next question, Niels. I see we have some good
Yeah,
questions coming in, so I'll try and move
I'm
fast.
trying to find that one, but no luck so far. Suzanne's asking, can you talk more about the backroom support from VC Lab and Founders Institute?
Yeah, so if you're thinking to launch an accelerator, we have an accelerator track in the current cohort 14 program that's starting in about a month, but the early admissions deadline it's starting in just under a month, and the early admissions deadline is Monday. Okay, and thank you for putting the link in there, Niels. And so we're going to cover all this in the accelerator track. I mean, we'll be working on your thesis, helping you fundraise. So you're going to need to do you're going to have the regular VC Lab program and some additional accelerator stuff to do on top of it. So it's going to be a bit harder. But you'll have the dedicated track in cohort 14 for accelerators. Now, as you form your accelerator and you want to do something, Founder Institute will provide either a curriculum and technology, or just the technology to help you if you need it. So we are collaborating with the Founder Institute to make a world-class accelerator launch program for you. So if you want to use the Founder Institute stuff, it's absolutely available, and it will be made through the VC Lab track.
Yeah, a lot of questions, not a lot of time. It does look like you
Yeah,
have
so we don't have a lot of
stuff.
time. Are you hard stop, Niels, after this? What's
You
your
seem to
calendar
have
look?
one. You have office hours, it seems like.
Yes, but it doesn't say with who. Oh, I have VC La LP Institute.
Yeah.
Let me see if anyone signed up for those office
Okay.
hours.
Yeah, if not, we can
Um,
keep going for a little bit.
let's do that's gonna take me a minute to do because I got a
I'm
five-step process to figure out my office hours. But in the meantime, what's the next question?
The next question, accelerators typically use 6 or 7% equity take. Gilberto assumes, what are some of the other instruments that can attract high growth early stage founders? Royalties, secondaries, warrants, anything else?
The equity stakes are all over the map, guys, and there is no standard. So I think what you need to do is figure out what your thesis is, right? Market test it in the events, and then when you're working on setting up the structure in step, kind of 3 and 4, fundraising in step 3, and then setting up your structure in 4, as you're working on that, you're going to refine your model quite a bit, and you're going to get a sense of what your numbers are going to be in terms of ownership. But yeah, there's 100 different ways to do it. For the most part, most of you will want to do is it March 6th? Yeah, I do have someone that I gotta go to.
Yeah.
Wow, there's so many great questions here. Here's what we're gonna do. All right.
Mhm.
Niels, can you do me a favor and copy these
I
questions?
already did.
Perfect. There's a LinkedIn post about accelerators. Niels, if you don't mind posting these questions in that LinkedIn post, I will go in, and I don't want to be rude. I'm meeting with a limited partner right now for office hours. I'm going to go in and answer all of your questions, right, in that post. So you'll get a written answer versus a verbal answer. Let me tell you why we care about this, and we'll wrap. It's really a seminal time worldwide for venture capital. We are seeing the venture capital model expand everywhere in the world. But if there aren't viable accelerators and funding accelerators in the different markets where venture is growing, it's you're going to have money up here and no talent down here. Accelerators create talent, they unlock startup ecosystems around the world. It's mission critical that we have more accelerators operating in key markets around the world so that the venture ecosystems can then thrive. And the thriving venture ecosystem leads to thriving accelerators, and thriving accelerators allow venture ecosystems to coexist. So the two are symbiotic and absolutely necessary. All right, everyone, this was awesome. All your questions will be answered in the LinkedIn post. Post that for everyone, please, Niels.
I
And
did.
sorry I have to run because this is a topic so near and dear to my heart. Thanks, everyone.